As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous people of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions towards decolonization. We acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that was never meant to be owned. We recognize that most of the land that was entrusted to indigenous peoples was in some cases shared by choice, but all too often taken by force. We recognize that historical colonialism and the ongoing colonialism that has led to the present-day situation where land acknowledgements are offered in place of land. As people of African descent, many of us have come here by choice, while many are here as a result of historical force. We acknowledge the complexities where we were promised land that was never given by those whose it never was to give. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor the dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. So thank you. Thank you to those that are watching online. This is being streamed, so enjoy.
Thank you.
Hello. I think before we start, we're just going to do literally very quick our names and who we are, so you all know where we're coming from. I'm Camille Dundas. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Canada's #1 Black online magazine, byblax.com. That's BYBLACKS.com. Meta is really blocking us right now, so you can't follow us. You can follow us on Instagram, but please follow us on TikTok instead until we get that sorted. Hashtag Online News Act. Yeah, okay. But we're not here to talk about that. I'm also the founder and principal educator of The Idea Practice. It is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm where I have 7 other consultants who help me deliver Canada's first online micro-credential for education in the corporate workplace on inclusion in the workplace. That's offered through Dalhousie University, so you can take that anytime. Please feel free to sign up and tell your coworkers about it. Okay, my colleagues are here and they will quickly introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Leslie Ann Lewis and I am the Director of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for CN Railways. We operate across Canada and into the United States, so across North America, and we have roughly 25,000 people, lots of opportunity to practice inclusion.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Trotman. I am the lead equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant for MNP, which is a professional services firm. I work with our clients to approach strategy and people with equity by design and centering equity. And I'm so happy to be here with all of these folks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jermaine L. Murray. You have to say the whole thing like a Tribe Called Quest. Online, you may know me as the Job Father. I'm the founder of JupiterHR. We are an organization dedicated to helping getting as many Black people in tech as possible. We have a goal of trying to help 500 Black people get jobs in tech, and we've been doing this since 2019. We're currently at 385. Hope I can find my 386 success story here today. Thank you.
The Job Father. I love that.
I didn't give myself that nickname, I swear, but I know good branding.
Oh, yes. We know a good brand when we see one. We're here to talk about quiet quitting. And like many of you, the first time I saw this phrase or this trend was on TikTok with a hilarious character called Veronica, where she quiet quits almost every day. I, however, have grown to detest the term quiet quitting the more I think about it and the more I think about of the origins, especially for Black folk. One, if you want to understand start understanding this issue or trend, which really is not a new trend, I want you to think about the evolution of hustle culture. Quiet quitting absolutely is a rejection of hustle culture. And if you think back to, I guess, the dot-com boom, the 90s and the 2000s, when tech companies really started to dominate our economy and our industry is when you started to really hear about, like the always be hustling, like Travis Kalanick, the Uber CEO, that was one of his core values of his company. And if you've worked for a tech company, you know how that is. And so then we developed, it started to become part of our lingo in our community, and also if you think back even to your parents' times and hustlers, the idea of a hustler, that is absolutely part of Black culture. We have sort of claimed it in a way. But if you even think back to times of enslavement and post-enslavement, Black people always had to work and work harder than everyone else and work more than everyone else and work 2 and 3 jobs just to make it. And if you're an immigrant here, or even if you're not, you probably have parents who ingrain in you that you have to work twice as hard to make it half as far. And so I think that the idea of quiet quitting is almost a form of resistance for Black people, because we are now evolving to a point where we're like, no. And also where we have seen that the working twice as hard doesn't actually always even work, because the goalpost always seems to be shifted. And so it is both, I think, a form of resistance and also just simply a response to the economic times, in that most of us do need 2 and 3 jobs to actually just make ends meet. So we can't afford to be doing more at work, because when we leave at 5, we have to go home and then get on the computer or figure out your consulting business or your this or that. I've been doing that since I was, straight out of school. I've never worked one job. I've always been doing something else. And that was simply because in the field I was in journalism and media, my one job could never sustain even the most basic of lifestyles.
Taking it from a corporate perspective in terms of it, I don't like the term either, because I think at the end of the day, when I read up about it a little bit, just to be clear, they talked about doing the bare minimum. But what does bare minimum mean? If bare minimum means you're doing what you're expected to do, then I really don't see how it's quitting if that's what you're doing. And if you're not doing that, and there's a problem with that, then that becomes a performance management issue. And this is, again, a very corporate perspective. But I really do take issue with it, because I think that what we're really trying to get at is we're trying to get people's discretionary effort. But that's why it's called discretionary effort. And if that's what you want from people, then you need to treat them in a way that they want to give you that. And I think that there's a trade-off that needs to happen. So I too take great issue with the whole notion of quiet quitting. I'm doing my job and I'm doing what you ask me to. That's not quitting.
When I first heard the term, honestly, it made me think of my grade 7 teacher, Mr. Allen. And I'm not sure, I'm not going to age myself, but there was a strike when I was in grade 7 where the teachers didn't go on a full strike. They did what was called a work to rule strike. I remember asking Mr. Allen, I'm like, what does work to rule mean? And he was actually the first person that said quiet quitting to me. He was like, I'm basically quitting on the low. And I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, don't ask me to stay behind for extra work. Don't ask me to run your clubs. Don't ask me to do anything that's not in my job description, because we've been doing above and beyond work. We don't get thanks. We don't get what we want. And when come time for us to ask, hey, can we get more support? They look at us and they frown. So I've always found that the term quiet quitting to be, when it hit mainstream, to be one that just seems like a propaganda act, because it seems like employers are really trying to punish us for not going above and beyond for them, and they never do that when it comes to salaries and benefits, right? It's always a one-way street. But yeah, it is. I'm glad that the whole panel feels the same way about the marketing scheme.
Your teacher was ahead of the curve already knowing that term. But yeah, I think as I was listening to everything you were all saying, I really struggle with this idea of what is quiet quitting and what triggers quiet quitting. And I say that because, like you mentioned, it's like doing the bare minimum. But if people are doing their job, are they really quitting, or are they just doing their job? And especially bringing in the EDI connection between all of us, oftentimes I think there's this expectation for certain people, especially in today's day and age, especially with Black folks, to do more, to do extra, to take on the side thing, to do the extra initiatives. And if you're saying no, it's almost perceived as, well, why not? And then there's repercussions for that. So I also think that as I think about what is the bare minimum, and then I equate it to margin of error, we know that the margin of error is much smaller for certain people, especially even Black women. And we think of that, how is the bare minimum different for different people? And so when we think of this term, I think inevitably it's actually inequitable in the way it's approached and how we perceive or what bare minimum means for different people. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And we can, in this free-flowing format, choose from our, I feel like we're sitting and playing a board game or something like that, you know?
Your turn.
That was a blank one.
The question is, how has the prevalence of remote work and digital communication impacted the phenomenon of quiet quitting? My quick answer to that would, I believe that during COVID and when we were forced to work remotely, I think a light bulb went off in a lot of our heads, in the sense that we're like, hang on, I'm actually doing a whole lot more at home, and maybe I feel a lot more comfortable because I'm not facing those daily microaggressions. When I walk into the office, I ain't got nobody putting their hands up in my hair. I can mute your ass if I don't want to hear what you're saying, and that's a bonus. And so a lot of us were thinking, you know what? Yeah, I can just get by and still deliver, still get paid. I think for sure remote work triggered that in a lot of us. The tricky part here, which is what you were alluding to, is that this term quiet quitting is really steeped in capitalism, because it automatically triggers supposed to trigger a feeling of guilt in us if we are not doing more and more, if you're not constantly striving. I can remember the last tech job I held. I had a conversation with, listen, I don't want to be nobody's manager because I got 2 kids and that's what managing is, okay? And I never wanted to be a manager. I never wanted to move up. I didn't want more pay. I truly did not. There were things I wanted though. I wanted to influence where the company was going with EDI. We had no affinity groups. We had no EDI policies. It was completely underdeveloped. I wanted to do that. That's what I was motivated by. But my manager could not wrap his head around that. All he was like, don't you want more money? Like and every time I would try to quit, I literally, not quiet quit, I literally tried to quit 3 times. And they would just throw me another 10 grand, throw me another 10 grand. I'd be like, all right, well, okay, let's keep going, right? But I'm like, he couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that I was not motivated by money or moving up in the company. He just couldn't. And that's, as you said, about management. It's a management issue, because if you don't appreciate or even seek to listen or understand what is motivating your direct report, you certainly will have people who are disengaged, which is really what is at the heart of quiet quitting.
And I think
How
also
has prevalence of remote work and digital communication impacted?
visual learner.
Yes.
No, I think also, as you mentioned all of that, I wonder, and this is a question for all of us, I think as we sometimes detach, but also some of us have to work because we have to work, right? And digital work allowed us to do our job, our 9 to 5, but also explore other areas. But I wonder what this idea of belonging and actually creating organizations that foster inclusion have to do with this detachment. So maybe a question for all of us. Do we think that would improve the phenomenon of quiet quitting? And how do we even do that?
I think it would. I think it's important that people realize that they're valued. And I want to make just a clarification. The whole notion of I'm working too much, I'm working too many hours, be careful about that, because what you produce at the office or what you produce at work, that's your personal brand. So you need to be careful that you're not letting somebody else's ideas or values or whatever it is affect that. But there needs to be some level of balance. But that being said, I do think that it is important that when you look at the work that you're doing, it's not just how much you produce, what's the quality of the work you're producing. So again, that's why I struggle again with the term of quiet quitting, because expectations of going, above and beyond. Above and beyond what? In terms of hours? Because you could stay at work for 12 hours and produce nothing, and someone else can be in there for 6 and just get it all done. So there are a lot of nuances, I think, in the topic, but I do think that it is important that, and if you want, I'm going back to that whole notion of discretionary effort, that you're creating an environment where someone says, I'm seen, I'm valued, what I do matters, who I am matters. And I think that you're right. The way we started to work in the last few years has had people have the time to sit back and reflect. I know I have to work, most of us do, but how do I want to work? What do I want to do? And so there are a lot of different kinds of conversations going on there. So I think it's important that more focus on that belonging piece is happening at organizations, even at a very corporate, long time established, like a 104-year-old company like mine. We are looking at things differently now because the world of work has really changed.
And then, sorry, I was
go
going
ahead.
to quickly add, it's you said, how do you want to work? And I find it interesting is we have organizations talking about quiet quitting, but then at the same time, most of their slogans have transitioned to, I won't say certain slogans because maybe they'll call out certain organizations, but with the overall message of working your way, flexible for you, how does it work for you? But then they're also using this term at the same time, and there's a huge contradiction with that. And sorry, go ahead.
No. All really good points. And I think for me, when I saw this question, it made me think back to I feel like there were like a social contract between employers and employees was broken about 3 or 4 decades ago, but no one really noticed because by default, like your default is to protect your job, is to protect like your how you feed your kids, how you put food on the table. But when remote work became a thing in 2020, people realized that they were getting much more work done with like half of the stress from either, traveling to work and having to deal with that morning commute to being able to isolate yourself from the microaggressions in the workplace. And it made people realize that for a very long time, employers have been taking advantage of their employees, of their labor. They've been asking for more and more and more. Meanwhile, things like the cost of living has skyrocketed, but salaries hasn't. And it's always perplexed me how, if we pay people a living wage, everything's gonna go up. What was it like the other day? I went to McDonald's and it was like $32 for 2 combos. When did that happen? When did a McChicken become $16, right? And it's just like, all right, you're in remote work and now you're realizing you're hitting all your KPIs, but you also now have this flexibility to just have more agency over your life. And the fact that employers' first response was to try and take that away or force you back in the office, or Brookfield Place putting ads in their lobbies mocking people for coming back to the office, you realize, they don't really rate me. They don't really rate me at all. Like, why would I want to continue working here? And then being remote, you see that there's a bunch of different opportunities. Like, is everyone familiar with the term overemployed? For those that aren't aware, overemployed is when you hold down 2 full-time jobs working simultaneously. They aren't aware of it, right? There's a whole nuance thing here, but the reality is that some people are able to do their full-time jobs in a couple of hours and they can balance out under the full-time job. People will double their income, and employers don't like this because they're like, if you're in the shower, you should be thinking about how to make more money for me, not how to make more money for yourself. And it's like that social contract's broken because it used to be in my parents' day, you could work as an executive assistant and buy a nice house in Brampton for $200,000. That same house is $2 million, and that salary is still the same salary. So like, wagwan, what's good?
That's why I say it really, you really have to think about how capitalism it impacts this whole thing. Because when you said about social contract, it made me think about like what is, and belonging as well. It made me think about the faux belonging that a lot of specifically tech companies do, right? And I only started to realize that once I started working in tech, and I was like really bright-eyed about the whole thing. I was like, what? They have a nap room, they have drinks on tap on Friday, and they have this. I'm like, wow. I call my mom like, mom, I work at this coolest place ever. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is all in an effort to keep me here longer. For longer hours, so I never have to leave. And I was like, what? And I was like, wait a minute, they're expecting something in return for this. And the belonging piece for me is really about, it doesn't, the whole quiet quitting thing and what we expect from people, it doesn't include people who are introverts. It also doesn't include people who have very strict boundaries between their personal life and their work life. Instead, you're made to feel like something is wrong with you. You're not a team player. You're not this. You're not good enough because you're not trying. Your quota is to close 10 deals this quarter, and you're supposed to want to do 20, and you're supposed to want to do 25, right? And I honestly, as a parent, I even have to catch myself inculcating that with my own children because I was raised in that A-type mentality and like, you need to have more. Like my son was doing a homework assignment and in the question it said, put between 3 and 7 bullet points in the answer. He's like, all right, good, I'm doing 3. I'm like, well, and he goes, yeah, that's meets expectation. I'm like, but do you want to be meets expectation? Or do you want to be over expected? He's like, why? And also when, people ask kids, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like I had to stop asking my kid that. At age 10, on my husband's side of the family, there's lots of doctors. On my side, lots of lawyers, right? And I say to him, you're going to be a lawyer, right? And he's like, what does a lawyer do? I explain. He's like, nah. And I'm like, and he goes, why? And he goes, I want to enjoy my life. At 10 years old. Okay, so one of the, I think, questions here is about generational divides, and it absolutely is real. That generational difference is real, because at 10 years old, he's probably looking at me and his dad like, what are you doing? Even at breakfast, my daughter the other day said, it seems to me like you guys are taking better care of us than you are yourselves. 8 years old. Okay.
From the mouth of babes.
8 years old. I was dead stopped in my tracks. I didn't even know what to say, right? So the generations, they're looking at this like, this is not working out. What are you doing, right? So as employers, and my husband and I also own 2 small businesses, so I've also fell into this trap myself, right? Of this expectation of the people that we hire. And I'm like, all the people that we hire are part-time. Okay, so I have to have huge flexibility when it comes to your deliverables, your hours, etc. And frankly, I cannot don't open a business expecting that the people you hire will even want to work as hard as you do for your business. And I feel like that's what most companies are going in with, whereas they're making their $1 billion profit at the end of the day, and like you said, they're just expecting you in the shower to be constantly thinking about, how do I make more money for my boss? Like, no, I'm thinking about, I got to pick up my kid at 4:00 from school. I'm thinking about this and that, right? So it's an unfair exchange, and people are getting wise to it.
So quick question, again, coming from corporate, with respect to that whole expectation of thinking about it, because I also see that, I do see those changes, and I do, like my daughter flat out says to me, I do not want to work like you. She doesn't, she doesn't hold back.
They're not about it.
But I also see, as an older person, and I'm in HR,
Yeah.
young people coming in, they've been there a year and a half. Oh, it's time for me to move to a new job.
Right.
But you haven't done anything yet. So here's my question. How do you balance that notion of, because if you want to advance, let's be blunt, it's not going to happen by doing just the minimum. So can you all comment on that a little bit? Because there's a trade-off there.
So I think that's more on the employers, to be real with you. And the reason being is that I'll give you a comparison. I had 2 friends, both 5 years into their career. One makes 70% more than the other person, and that person had 3 jobs in the last 5 years versus the one person that stayed at the one job for the 5 years. Employers are too hesitant when it comes to actually adequately compensating their people. So you say, yeah, you haven't done much in a year, but if Joe over here is offering me 30% more, saying like, hey, you know what? The stuff that you have on your resume in that 1 year that you did, I value that. Why would I stay?
Well, that's where the belonging piece comes in. And again, maybe I can only speak from the experience where I am. Fair wages. It's not, the compensation is scale. At the railway pays well. It does pay well, and as you climb up, it's almost vulgar. It really does pay well. So there's a correlation between the level you go and what you're paid, and even at like a locomotive engineer, someone who doesn't even have to have more than a high school. I'm not insulting anybody who only has high school, well qualified, can make a 6-figure salary easily. It's a unionized role. So, but there are different roles, and not everybody has to be an executive, Sure. But just to say that the comp piece doesn't factor in, at least in my reality currently, you're paid for the job that for the jobs that you do.
I would say, just as a frustration for a lot of younger people, is that it's just like, yeah, I could see, like you tell me, like 5-10 years, I can make X, Y, and Z. But if I'm like a lot of people in my generation make twice as much as their parents did, and they can't afford, they're still struggling. So it's like, you're saying like, yo, think about it in 5 years. And I'm like, brethren, in 5 months, like I might not even be able to stay here. And it's like, it's like risk and reward. So it's like, if I know, like, if you're saying in 10 years I can make 200K, and if I know if I make jumps every 2-3 years and I can up myself 30-40%, I ain't worried about that 200K. I might hit that in year 8 before the person that stayed in that place hits that in year 10. And as long as that is still a viable option, that is always going to be the pattern. And it's hard to tell people, hey, think about the long game, when like the entry level stuff just doesn't add up, right? And as long as the entry level stuff doesn't add up, it's always going to be a hard sell to get somebody to stay in long term. It's like the conundrum of journalism. I went to school for journalism. My whole thing was I'm gonna be the Black Larry King. I could see it. If you go around Humber and you ask about audio chocolate, someone's gonna cringe and be like, I can't believe Jermaine was calling himself that. But the conundrum of journalism is that almost like, this is me hyperbolic, but I want to say like 99% of internships are unpaid. G98.7 had me driving from Brampton to Scarborough.
That's illegal now, though. It's illegal.
It's illegal now?
Yes,
Oh, thank
it's
God.
illegal now.
But historically speaking, journalism internships were
Yes.
unpaid. And it's
Yes.
like, only people that come from an affluent family can afford to do unpaid work. I still think about, I had a 6-cylinder car, Brampton to Scarborough every day, $1.30 gas. I know that sounds cheap right now, but like, when you're an unpaid student, it hurts a lot. And there's this expectation, again, capitalism, of you got to do unpaid work to get your dues to get what you're worth. And like, that's a broken equation.
And see, there's a fundamental problem with us when we said about you're not going to move up by doing the bare minimum. And if we think about that contract, right? Again, when I worked in tech, it was in sales, so that's the reference I have. If my quota is to hit 10 six-figure deals in the quarter, right? And I hit 10 six-figure deals every quarter, every single quarter. That's not getting me promoted, but why? But that's what I was hired to do. But at the all hands meeting, they're going to praise Larry, who did 20 and who stayed extra hours and who missed his son's football game and it's just, I remember being in those meetings where those things were glorified. Oh, and he came in sick. Oh, and my gosh, and he had COVID and he still did, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Like it was, and so this is what managers glorify, right? So if I'm in this environment where I'm like, hang on a second, yeah, but I closed my 10 deals. Like, where's my promotion? Okay, or maybe I don't want the promotion. But the fact is, I did what you paid me to do, but yet, because I'm not burning myself out, I'm not being recognized like the other person is. That to me is the fundamental problem.
And I think also that's where a culture shift needs to happen and how we're managing people, but also the culture that we're letting flow through our organizations and the things that we're starting. And I say that because I resonate with what you said. That's where the belonging piece comes in. And there needs to be a bigger effort for how do people actually have a sense of belonging and feel included, valued, heard, and seen at work. And there's that part. Then we also have to live. We also, for people living in Toronto, Vancouver, even Montreal now, like cost of living is, we all know, it's not cute. So literally it's how do we equate our salaries and equate that with belonging so organizations are fostering that as well. But then I also think that as we're working from home, I don't know who else did this during the pandemic. When you were working from home, I was constantly on LinkedIn looking at other jobs. Like I was doing my job, I was looking at other jobs, I'm constantly getting notifications, people wanna have a conversation. I'm always open, and I always give people the advice is always seek opportunity and be open to opportunity. You can be perfectly happy where you are, but when you're building out your brand and you're building your career, you don't know where an opportunity can take you. Be open to that. You don't know, it might not be this opportunity, but that person may be connected to someone else. So I think there's also, sometimes it's okay to hop, it's okay to shift, it's okay to explore different avenues. And then it goes back to what you were saying, but also remember, how are you building out your brand? And I think at the end of the day, you have to be strategic about what you're doing and how you're doing it. I see a hand is up.
I promise you it's relevant.
No, we rather take questions from y'all.
We're just winging it here.
I think there's also a case to be made, hear me out, for the people who are intrinsically motivated. I think some people are motivated by the money and motivated by the quotas, and I think some people are genuinely motivated by impact.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a conversation to be had around what impact the organizations that you're working in are having, a clarity of that impact, a desire to want to contribute to something bigger.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of my friends, including myself, I took a serious pay cut to join the community sector.
Yeah.
Because no paycheck in the world was fulfilling that inherent need for service and community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry, what's your name?
Danielle.
Danielle, thank you so much. I was going to say, and that's where I think passion comes into play and impact. Like, I know that I'm passion driven. I left a career in between my two careers because I felt that I didn't see my impact. I didn't see that I was driving change, and I didn't feel like, hey, I'm showing up to work every day and this feels meaningful to me. And in that situation, to what you just said, the pay didn't matter. There's also a certain level of pay that everyone has to sometimes take on because everyone has different situations, and I want to recognize that. There also comes like sometimes privilege with being able to take pay cuts and all that stuff as well. But I think also passion and impact have to come into play, but that's also what drives belonging. That if we can create passionate organizations where people can find a sense of belonging, they can identify passions, they can see direct impact and see their value, then that allots for inclusion and belonging and all these buzzwords we're now using.
And we've mentioned belonging and inclusion a lot here. And if you are new in the workplace or struggling with your manager to understand this, or if you are a manager, both relevant, it's important for us to treat our team members, our direct reports, as individuals and actually take the extra time to get to know what it is that motivates Danielle versus what motivates Camille, right? I absolutely, when I was working in that tech job, always getting, when you're in tech, you're always getting hit up, right? Hit up from a very popular job searching website and went in for the interview. I was like, boom, this is paying 50 grand more than I make. Let's do it. Then they're like, okay, yeah, we need you to come in 4 days a week. I'm like, we're done. That was it. End of conversation, because I have children and I cannot be in downtown Toronto 4 days a week. I cannot do it. And I thought to myself, 50 grand, I'm gonna pay that all in therapy because I'm just gonna be so depressed all the time. I'm like, it's not worth it, right? And so the manager though has to understand you and take the time. And I will say, I have had very good managers who have taken, it's painstaking, right? To have a one-on-one, and when I started working in tech was the first time I knew what a one-on-one was. In journalism, ain't nobody got time for that, right? The only time you speak to your boss is when there's a problem, right? And so, but they would take the time to talk to me about just my feelings. And I'd be like, okay, this is new, but we have to, and it feels very new agey, right? And I hear a lot of managers saying, oh, I'm a manager, not a babysitter. I get it, but you have to get to know that person. Otherwise, they will absolutely slip through the cracks. But my ultimate point though is in this, again, I don't want us to have people coming in making them feel like there is something inherently wrong with you because you don't want to close more than 10 or because you don't want to work 65 hours a week. We have to figure out what impact does she want to make on our company. I was screaming about impact of that company. I was saying, hey, this is what I want to do. Look, I just went to a roundtable with a whole bunch of other tech companies and I just found out what an affinity group is. How come we don't have those? There was lots that I wanted impact. That was what I was passionate about, but they did not value that, and ultimately why I left, right? So if they had valued that, maybe I would have stayed longer, and maybe I would have taken a promotion in a different role, something that matched what it is that I wanted to do. But they were very good about, the reason I stayed so long was because they were very good at giving me a very long leash. And I even use that word because it feels like that's what we're on at work, right? And when I say long leash, I had they knew I was doing by blocks, they knew I was doing consulting, I was speaking, I was doing here, and they allowed me to do those things. But I had to condition myself not to think of that as them doing me a favor. I went in thinking about it like that until I realized, hang on a second, my brand is hot and my brand helps your brand. So always think about your intrinsic value and don't be like, oh, thank you so much. Obviously, be cool, but there's a value. And when companies start to see the value in valuing you, right? That's when that belonging piece comes in. But we can't go into it as if they're doing us a favor.
You raised an interesting point about affinity groups because we started doing that. But one of the things that, as I say, the workforce is changing, I think there's a question, I believe, we're really off base here, but that talks about how employee empowerment actually helps. How does that play into the term, I'll say the word quiet quitting, but that does play a role because I think that those kinds of groups now provide a space where people who might be struggling or have concerns can go. So organizations now, and I think in my role as a director of diversity, I'm not delusional enough to think that I'm going to change everything. I'm going to try. But the point is, I may not be able to change it all, but in terms of the leadership of the organization, I'm going to make you aware. Because now you're making a conscious choice about how it is you're treating either underrepresented groups or everyone, really, to be very honest. Because what is it they say again? A rising tide lifts all boats. So there's benefit for everyone. But I think that's where the affinity groups and so on are helping, because it's raising awareness and providing outlets where employees might not otherwise have had the opportunity to stand up and say, this is an issue for me, or I need help here, or this doesn't work for me. So that I do think that they're helping.
Yes.
I have another question. Another question that we're gonna move on to, because I think we're not following the rules. I will say just one last thing, that throughout my career, I can definitely say that I felt like only one employer has actually like cared for me, and that was like the one employer that I would have stayed long-term career if they didn't lay me off. But hey, I remember, I'm not gonna lie, I remember walking to the office, I remember going, you know what? I could see myself for 5 years here. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder like, yo, Jermaine. I'm like, what? They're like, yo, they turned off the beer taps. I'm like, oh, it's a bad sign. And the next week we got laid off. So if you're in the office and they turn off the beer taps, that's a heads up. Okay, so for the next question, is quiet quitting actually a thing, or is it supremacist in nature to expect more than a worker than designated in their contract? I feel like we kind of answered.
Talk that way.
Just get it.
You take it out.
Yeah, let's take that out.
You did leadership?
The potential consequences?
Oh, yeah, we
Sure.
can do that one.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. What are the potential consequences of quiet quitting for individual employees and for the organization as a whole? I think the consequences for quiet quitting, especially for Black folks, is that we lose the political game, office politics. I think this is one of the number one reasons why a lot of Black people are so pro remote work. It doesn't have anything about, like, of course it has a lot to do with, our space and feeling safe and being ourselves. But a lot of times office politics and perception plays a big part in how we get promoted, right? I know so many Black women have been told that, oh, you're not really friendly, right? Or like, oh, you have a bit of an attitude problem, all because like they just had an opinion and they got characterized as that person. So I do think for individuals, quiet quitting from a political sense can put us in danger. For an organizational sense, I think that says a lot more about your organization and the lack to engage your employees, or the lack they feel like equity they have. And not just equity, I mean like skin in the game, like impact, intention, right? Are you making a safe space for them? And if you are, I don't think quiet quitting would be such a quote unquote big thing if people just felt valued.
The consequence of quiet quitting is being quietly fired.
Yes.
Where your boss will just make it so difficult for you, i.e. they will assign you to a different department that you've never worked in, you have no experience in. You'd be like, oh, I'm working in IT? Okay. They'd be like, yeah, you got it. We believe in you. You got it. And then triple your workload to the point where you start complaining. And then they're like, oh, is this maybe not a right fit for you then?
Did you read my diary?
Right? and turning off the taps is a sure sign. Also them asking you for all the passwords. Also a sure sign you're being quietly fired. That is the consequence. And I think, speaking to your point, you are right in the sense that is what is going to happen. I don't think it's right for that to be the consequence, but I'll be lying to you, to say that wouldn't be the consequence. So I'm saying if you are someone who wants to work that way of doing what you are asked to do, then I'm assuming you're doing that because you have other things going on. And I don't think that's a bad idea either. Like I said, I've never worked one job, and I don't think I will never. I've been laid off 3 times, and I never have apart from my first job out of university before I got wise to the game, I would never put all of my eggs in one basket. I would never give my all to one employer. I wouldn't do it. So yeah, that's the advice. If you're quiet quitting, have other stuff.
I actually have to say, again, from a corporate perspective, the problem, the consequence for quiet quitting for an organization is a culture of mediocrity. Because what you want are people that are on fire, engaged, interested, committed, moving things along, on their own.
That doesn't mean, but someone who's quiet quitting doesn't mean that they're not interested in engage. It just means I'm not going to burn out in order to produce more for the company.
I understand that, but my point is that if everybody does that, let's be honest, no company makes ridiculous profits, and that's what companies are in business to do. It's nice to say that we do things to be ethical. They're there to make profit.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you? Is what you're doing to make that contribution, does it make sense for you? That's a different question. But even a railway, at the end of the day, what does CN do? We connect the entire continent. Yeah. We don't work, we can cripple the economy. Yeah. That's impact.
Yeah.
But what role do you play
Absolutely.
in that, and how we treat you in that makes a difference.
If there's some, emergency with the trains, I'm not gonna be like, sorry guys, it's 5:55, I'm off the clock, right? You know what I mean? You're gonna want someone who's gonna pick up the phone because they're passionate about the job, they care about the job.
Yeah,
I get that.
You're right. It's amplified because we also run 24/7, 365. It also is about the environment. There are a lot of things you need to think about as far as how you're going to engage with an employer, understand the expectations. But again, I'll be very honest and say, I'm working hard under that culture of inclusion for us to have more respect and try to interact with managers. And I want to say, if you're managers of people, it's not just up to your senior leaders. Your immediate manager, or as an immediate manager, you have way more impact on people's commitment and engagement than anyone else in the organization.
Absolutely.
So don't undersell that either.
Yeah. Give me the last word here.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I want the last word, but no, I think also as we think about potential consequences on the individual, I think there's also consequences for the organization if they continue to foster environments where people are quietly quitting, because, like you just said, culture of mediocrity. If you're fostering that, that means you're not, and not that you're not sustaining good people, because they could be good people, they're just quietly quitting. But I think there's consequences for organizations if they don't do something to make people want to enhance what they're doing, to further put more input in, to feel a sense of belonging. So yes, I think we're talking about the individual, but also I think part of the onus is on the organization to do better, be better, and enhance their cultures so you have less people quietly quitting, but also acknowledging that people have lives and interests outside of their jobs, and to enable them to be their full self, authentic self, as they come to work and be open about the different things that they're doing. Hopefully someone adds something. I don't want the last word.
The best thing a manager ever told me and made me feel like I wanted to stay there was, we want you to be successful and happy whether it's here or not.
Yes.
Thank you for sitting with us in this living room. We'll be outside if you have questions. Take care.
Thank you so much. Can we give another round of applause for this amazing panel? Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Camille. And thank you, Jermaine. Thank you for everyone watching. I wish we could stay here and talk more about this subject. It was enlightening. So many things we have to unlearn and relearn. But thank you, everyone.